Now to the main event of today. We have with us Dr. Ejaz Ghani. Ejaz Ghani was previously the lead economist at the World Bank and has worked in Africa, East Asia, South Asia, on corporate strategy and independent evaluation unit. He contributes economic opinion columns to the Business Standard, The Hindu, Financial Express, Mint, and many others. He's edited several books, including Reshaping Tomorrow, Is South Asia Ready for the Big Leap?, which was published by Oxford University Press in 2011. He's also written The Poor Half Billion in South Asia and The Service Revolution in South Asia, as well as Accelerating Growth and Job Creation in South Asia, Promoting Economic Cooperation in South Asia, and Growth and Regional Integration. Prior to joining the World Bank, he taught economics at St. Anne's College of Oxford University and Sri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi University. He obtained an MPhil and DPhil in economics from Oxford University. He did his schooling in Bihar, bachelor's at St. Stephen's College, and master's at Jawaharlal Nehru University, India. And he's an INLAC scholar. So we're really looking forward to hearing Dr. Ejaz Ghani. But let me also introduce the moderator for the session, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan. Dr. Natarajan is the founder of 5F World, a platform dedicated to investment and mentoring of startups, skills platforms, and social enterprises. He's also the chairman of Skills Alpha, Pune City Connect, and Social Venture Partners India, and the co-founder and chairman of Global Talent Track. He is a distinguished alumnus award winner of IIT Mumbai and NITIE. He's led 2 corporate success stories with distinction, Aptech, which you'll all know, between 1991 and 2001, and Zensar between 2001 and 2016. Zensar in the last 5 years has had a compound annual growth rate, market value growth, of 44% annually, a record for the industry. He's a member of the Chairman's Council of NASCOM and has been the chairman of NASCOM and the NASCOM Foundation. He's also a member of the National Council of the CII, a board member and past president of the Harvard Business School Club of India, and a fellow of the Computer Society of India. He's an alumnus of BIT Mesra, NITIE, and IIT Mumbai, as well as Harvard Business School. He's the author of 4 McGraw-Hill books on business process reengineering and knowledge management, and various other areas. He's also an independent director of SBI and chairman of the board of Honeywell. So we have 2 brilliant people who are going to be in conversation. So can I please welcome Dr. Ganesh Natarajan and Dr. Ejaz Ghani to the stage. And please, sir, come. Thank you. And Ramesh, could I request you to just felicitate our guest? We'll just do the photo op beforehand. Okay. I'll arrange to have that taken away. Welcome, and just put over here for you. Welcome, and we really look forward to listening. Please.
Do I dare? Would actually work. Right, good evening to everybody, and let me add my welcome, because I know it's not easy to get people out of home these days. So we thought we'll do it bravely and said let's start the process of TiE getting people back to attending physical meetings. And there's always this temptation ki Zoom bhi karenge so that some people can watch on Zoom. So we said no. Okay, either you're here or you're not here. Okay, so thank you very much for being here, because Ejaz is one of the most distinguished people we have of Indian origin, who's been in the US, still in the US. And when he said he was coming here, we said, okay, let's get a few people to listen. And of course, if people are very nice and pay us 5,000 rupees each, we might send them the video. Right, Rashmi? So that's how it is. And we're going to do this in 5 parts. I want to make this interactive. So feel free. I might even call you out and say, you ask the question. So Patanjali, you better be careful. No sleeping. So because we just want to make it as interactive, get as much from Ejaz in the next 1 hour as we can. So I'll divide it into 5 parts. Okay, in the first part, we'll talk a little bit about Ejaz. Because, I mean, he and I share only one thing. We both grew up in Bihar. We both went to school in Bihar. But I stayed back in Bihar and he went to Stephens, and that made all the difference. So we need to understand a bit of his progress. And after that, we will talk a little bit about something that Vandana said, that what got you here won't get you there. And we all know that the whole government of India, the finance minister's speech is all focused on India at 100. Okay, it's almost like India at 75 next year will come and go. But what do we do in the next 26 years to really become a significant nation in this world? Okay, so I think that's something we should talk about. We are also worried, at least some of us, about inclusive growth. Okay, in fact, Ejaz and I were just talking before we started about the whole digital divide. And there's not just a digital divide in the country, there are various divides that we will not go into here. But how do we get inclusive growth to happen over the next maybe 26 years, if I include the next 1 year run-up we have to, not even now it's just hardly 4 months, so maybe 25 years. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We will talk about, being a TiE forum, the role of entrepreneurship. Because there is a lot of hype, as all of us know, about Startup India, Stand-Up India, etc., etc. But how has entrepreneurship created economies worldwide, particularly in Silicon Valley, in the US, various parts of Europe, and how do we learn from that and take it forward? In that context, we'll also talk a little about one of Ejaz's favorite themes, and he has many, of the services economy and how this whole services movement can take this forward. We also want to talk about something which is very close to my heart, Vandana's heart, and of course Ejaz's heart, which is the participation of women, not only in the economy, but in terms of building new leaders for the industry, for industries, and for the country. And then we'll finally conclude by talking about the whole green growth. As all of you must be aware, Prime Minister Modi has committed that by 2017, we will be a net zero economy, so we will not be a polluter at all. And that takes a lot of doing. I was talking to my friend Jayant Sinha the other day, and Jayant believes that we have to start like yesterday to achieve that goal. So we will get some of Ejaz's thoughts on the green economy. What I thought we'll do is, maybe every 15 minutes or so, I'll pause and ask for questions so that you don't kind of have to bottle up the question. And then we'll kind of take it forward. But in the interim, if somebody has a burning question that you must ask, feel free to raise your hand. Okay, we are a small group. Let's make it interactive. So Ejaz, let me first of all welcome you. I mean, we've been in touch for the last 1 year because Ejaz and I are kind of editing a book together, which Rupa Publishing will probably publish during this year, which is really Pathways to India at 2030. And we didn't look at 2047, which we'll talk about, but more in terms of the next 9 years of the economy, or 8 years, and seeing how to do that. So we've been in touch very, very often. But first time I'm also meeting him physically, so it's a pleasure for me. But just tell me a little bit about your story. I mean, where did you grow up in Bihar? What was the motivation? And a little bit about the last 30, 40 years of your life.
So I'm not going to focus on the past because past has already been told. So I'm going to focus on my future. Yes. So I'm so impressed with this place that I think it's time for me to come back from Washington, D.C., back to India, and live a better life and contribute more. I mean, the past has been, as you said, fantastic. I mean, education was the key. And as long as you have access to education, you can do well. I mean, my best memory is of St. Stephen's College, where I went on to become the president of the Students' Union. A year before me, Shashi Tharoor was the president, but we were very different people, so I have very fond memories of my past, and I really think about the future, and I think I'm so inspired by this organization that I'm going to learn a great deal from here with the interactions. So my focus is how much can I learn from you, especially the questions and your motivation, and try and find out what could be good solutions for it. So I'm here to learn from you.
Okay. Yeah, so a little bit more about the I mean, what took you to World Bank and what kind of roles did you play? Because for a lot of us, World Bank is a black box. So we'd really love to know, and I know your wife also played a significant role in World Bank. So just tell us a little bit about, I mean, there is a common phenomenon that if you stand outside the World Bank building, you'll see more Indians coming out than Americans. So first of all, is that myth true? And what takes people like you to the World Bank and contribute so much to the global economy?
It's not only World Bank. The CEO of Google is an Indian. So we are all over the place. And there is a reason for it. You know, USA has a very aging population. China too has a very aging population. But India has the youth bulge. And this youth bulge will continue for the next decade. So what Ejaz Ghani did, millions of Ejaz Ghanis will come in future from India. My own experience of the World Bank, you know, I enjoyed it. It's good. I mean, I'll tell you two stories, which were a bit dramatic, and I recollect my memory. This is the East Asian financial crisis period, if you recall. And, you know, the IMF mission went to Thailand and disagreed with the Ministry of Finance and came back. So Thailand approached World Bank, and the World Bank sent one member team, me, to Thailand. I reached there, and this is after the 50-member mission of IMF has left. So I met a lowly official undersecretary at the Ministry of Finance. He said, "Why are you wasting your time?" He had no hope, but I did say that, look here, long flight, I thought about it, you need a fiscal stimulus to overcome the crisis. He got up and he said, "How dare you say this? Because the IMF disagreed that you can't have fiscal stimulus." He escalated the meeting to the governor of central bank, and we did a deal. I came back, and my country director, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, she is the chairperson of the World Trade Organization right now. Then she was with me in the World Bank. And she said, "Just what have you done? They're not going to accept fiscal stimulus during a downturn." But then Joe Stiglitz, the chief economist, was there, and it went through. So we gave $1 billion package. But we had to maneuver so much. But it also goes to show that World Bank is a very flexible organization. And don't get deterred by, you know, past episodes that you have to be conservative. You can take innovative approaches. And I suspect every organization works like that. So don't give up hope and, you know, just keep pursuing your goal. Another experience that I have of the World Bank, you know, one of the presidents of World Bank hired McKinsey to do the corporate strategy and restructuring of the World Bank. You know, World Bank is short of money. Demand is too much. So with 50 McKinsey guys, I worked with them. At the end of the day, we came up with a PowerPoint to the president of the World Bank. Increase the money, otherwise you can't lend to poor countries. Two options. Either USA will increase its contribution, or it will let China increase its contribution. The president of the World Bank took the PowerPoint and threw it in the dustbin. So World Bank is a global organization. It has many ups and downs, but that shouldn't deter us from doing that. That kind of sums up my experience of the two things that I recall.
No, I think that's very impressive because, I mean, we all think of institutions, including the RBI, as, you know, somewhat stodgy, somewhat bound by precedents and everything else. But it's interesting to see the kind of innovation that's possible when there is a good cause, absolutely. So let's move to India, Ejaz. I mean, I know you're very passionate about the country and how it could grow. So let's start with a very broad perspective. I mean, just give us a vision. If everything goes right, over the next 26 years, and India at 2047, which is 100 years old as an independent democracy, really is successful, what do you think must go right? What could go wrong? So more of a general thought process, and then we'll probe into specifics of what you see. So what does India do, in your opinion, in the next 26 years?
Thanks. What India needs to do over the next 2 decades, we can draw the lesson by looking at what happened in the last 2 decades. So we examined that. India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And, just like China and many other countries. And we asked the question, what is driving growth? And, the iron law of development has always maintained that in development, a developing country must move from agriculture, then into manufacturing, and then into IT services. But India broke the iron law of development. It jumped straight from agriculture into modern services. Is there evidence for it? Yes. When we examined the contribution of services sector to output growth, the contribution of the services sector to GDP growth is much higher than manufacturing sector. The services sector are contributing much more to the job growth than manufacturing sector. So, it's good to reflect on the new growth model, but we also know that this growth is not good enough to create enough jobs and get rid of poverty. We'll have 200 million more people joining the labor force during the next decade. 10 million additional people join the labor force every year because of the demographic dividend, the youth bulge in the country. So, what does India need to do over the next 2 decades? I think the answer is here in this forum, entrepreneurship. This is the best platform I have seen. Why? Why should entrepreneurship be the key weapon for India for the next 20 years? Let me explain to you. Entrepreneurship is defined by new enterprises, less than 3 years old. So with Harvard Business School and I, at the World Bank, we picked up the NSS and ASI data, which has millions of enterprises in 630 districts in India. And we looked at millions of these enterprises and asked the question, which enterprises are contributing to output growth, job growth? Couple of things stood out. Most of the jobs in India are created by youth enterprises, by young enterprises, less than 3 years old, not existing old enterprises. The existing old enterprises may grab the headline, but they don't create jobs. It's the youth enterprises. So if anything the Ministry of Finance can do, and I hope their economic survey focuses on this, is to promote entrepreneurship, especially youth entrepreneurship. That will create jobs and contribute to growth. And that will also benefit from India's youth bulge. So what will it take to promote youth entrepreneurship? We asked that question. We examined 600 districts in India and asked, where are enterprises locating? What is driving the new enterprises where they locate? Couple of things stood out. We looked at youth enterprises in India and compared it globally. Unfortunately, the share of youth enterprises in India is much lower compared to the rest of the world. So that was worrisome. Second, women enterprises, extremely low. And unless, women enterprises get promoted, they are the ones who will create jobs. They are the ones who will bring 50% of the labor force, women who are not employed, back into the labor force. So the youth enterprises is critical from job creation, from gender inclusiveness, all lenses. So what does Prime Minister need to do to achieve that? There are only two drivers we found that will drive youth entrepreneurship: the level of physical infrastructure investment and the level of human infrastructure education investments. These are the two key drivers everywhere. And we examined this thoroughly. This has come out as Harvard Business School working papers, come out in journals. So that these are the critical things. This is not to say that those 5 pillars are not important. They are important. And actually, I'll avoid talking about networking, but I just want to home in on what does India need to do. India needs to promote youth entrepreneurship. And in order to promote youth entrepreneurship, India will need to scale up investments in physical and human infrastructure. That will create more jobs and that will sustain very high growth rate. And this holds equally for women entrepreneurs. What I heard that women entrepreneurs face difficulty in accessing banks, that bank loans, credit, that made me think. That question has to be answered. All young enterprises need 3 factors of production. They need land, labor, and capital to produce the output. And we ask the question, which of these 3 factors of production are most efficient or most distorted in India? And the efficiency is defined by if more efficient new enterprises can access more land, labor, and capital, then the factor markets are efficient. But if less efficient enterprises are accessing more land, labor, and capital, factor markets are distorted. We also ask the question, which factor market is most distorted in India? Unfortunately, land market is much more distorted than capital, than labor. Labor market is more efficient. Capital market is okay. Land market is very highly distorted. And capital market is distorted because land is used as a collateral for bank loans. And I don't know how the gender divide impacts access to land. So that's a good issue to think about.
Questions? Anybody? Yeah, please. Can you just tell Ejaz who you are also? It'll help.
My name is Sheetal Katyani, and I am a startup in Pune, and I'm being supported by TiE team in Pune as well. My question is, one of the theme you raised is on the focus of infrastructure and basically the asset creation, the capital to be employed for generation of the economy. My focus, we as a startup, mostly the India is focused on the service sector of maybe the employment generation and also in terms of economical growth. Service sector in terms of software and hardware. And the hardware is completely ignored at the moment. But then as a startup where we are focusing on manufacturing side of the business, maybe in terms of automation and robotics, right? India as economy, the focus is on the service side. How basically the other side of the economy where we are focused on, right? And basically there is some kind of a bias which comes in. How do you think this will help us tide? Because our focus on the hardware side, manufacturing side, but India does not really focus on the manufacturing side. It's focused on the software side of it. So how do you think this will help us divide? Whether we need to change our strategy after 4 years, 5 years of working, this will really help us to propel the growth, or maybe we need to really strategize our next phase of our development?
Thanks, so I think, Ejaz, the basic generic question is that manufacturing as a percentage of GDP has come down from close to 27% to now almost 16%. And as you rightly said, if you look at the China economy, moved from agrarian to manufacturing, then to this. So is this a sustainable model, I think, is Sheetal's question.
Sure. A very good question, and it needs a thoughtful and inclusive answer. It's not either or, both. I mean, we have to be asking the question, why is the manufacturing sector didn't take off? Or what will it take? We need both. So it's not either or. The distinction between manufacturing and services are now shrinking. When you sell a computer now, you also give 5-year guarantee of services, combine it with that. Or when you sell a car, in order to make it more attractive, you give 10 years of service warranty. So they are converging. So the distinction between manufacturing and services is converging over time. It just so happens that, India benefited from it because all the Americans want online services. They don't want one, they already have the car. They already have enough food. So India benefited because Europe and America, who had the money, they wanted these online services. India took off. But this is not good enough. We need to scale up. And there's only one solution. Scale up investment in physical and human infrastructure, which will benefit both the manufacturing and services sector. I mean, there are stories why, India adopted a more liberal approach. I mean, didn't care about the services sector. Ganesh may talk more about NASSCOM and, public-private partnerships. Nobody bothered. There was self-reliance and aggressive trade policies were not followed. It was, let go, and these public-private partnerships in the services sector worked well, and it took off. We need to bring in a similar approach to the manufacturing sector, where new enterprises have to enter. The number of new enterprises in the manufacturing sector is too small. I mean, of course, there are stories of scale economies and other things. But to answer your question, we need both. The distinction between manufacturing and services is getting blurred. The solution to scaling up the growth is the same: scale up investments in physical and human infrastructure.
No, and just to add, I mean, if you look at government's new policy, I mean, this whole PLIs, which you must be hearing about, the productivity linked incentives, I mean, they've started off in an area which was ignored. In fact, a lot of people blame us and NASSCOM for almost destroying the Indian hardware industry, for the simple reason that, look, there was a time when if you had to import something, the companies were frowned upon, and you had, HCL and Wipro manufacturing hardware. So honestly, it was a software industry which says, can we make it much easier to import hardware? So in a sense, that could have killed the industry. But today, as Ejaz is rightly saying, I think some balance will be restored. Other questions?
Yeah. So my name is my name is Manoj Poddar. I run a edtech startup, education technology startup, and I'm a TiE member. My question is, I have been hearing, and maybe many of us have been hearing, that we are experiencing, or we would soon experience, the end of capitalism. First,
End of what?
Capitalism.
Capitalism. Oh.
So my question to you is it, in your opinion, is it true? And if yes, then how does that really reflect on India's as well as world economy?
So will India really stop being a capitalist country is the next question. Very complicated one, Ejaz. All the best.
I think these are fears which are being used. I mean, there is a little bit of nationalism rising everywhere. It's the trade agenda. But let me tell you a story, I mean the true story, which will shed light and prevent us from making mistakes in the future. Once again, we looked at millions of enterprises in the NSS data. NSS is the survey for informal enterprises. Just as a background, 70% of the jobs in India are in the informal sector, only 30% in the formal sector. And we examined, where are the jobs being created, what's happening. And we found that a majority of the new job growth in the informal sector was in the tradable sector. In the non-tradable sector, it contracted. In the tradable sector, the global outsourcing, really helped small informal jobs in the manufacturing sector to explode. So, we have to look at the hard evidence before, we put an end to the trade agenda or end of capitalism. I don't know what it means. I can only look at it from the various lenses of trade and ownership, and I don't think that's going to happen so fast.
I think what our friend was trying to say is, with the recent crackdown of the Chinese government on the edtech companies in China, which led to a 90% wipe out in market share, is he fearing that would even happen?
Okay, let me elaborate on this. Yeah, I don't know China too well, but I can speculate. This platform is for youth enterprises, young enterprises, less than 3 years old. But many of the enterprises in the technology center have become too huge, too big, that they can take advantage of the intellectual property rights and others and prevent the new young enterprises from entering. This takes us to various kinds of, protection of intellectual property rights, protection of data, so many things. So if one large mammoth enterprise, which gets all of our online data, and then uses it only for its own profit and doesn't let the rest of the enterprises to enter, that raises a question. I'm not trying to answer about China. I'm trying to raise the question that end of capitalism has to be seen that it's end of monopoly and start of competition and new enterprises to enter too.
No, but I don't think the China comparison will hold, because if you look at the whole ideology of Xi Jinping, it's a very different approach. For instance, there is a point he makes about edtechs, literally like destroying the whole education system in China. Now that's a very perverse point, but it's not going to happen in India. Because India, much more, if you heard, even we recently conducted the Asia Economic Dialogue, where we had both Foreign Minister Jaishankar and at the end we had Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. And I think the vision that they are percolating down of the India 2047 is very much a combination of capitalism and obviously inclusive growth. Because you cannot have capitalism to an extreme where there is 80% of the country left behind. As Ejaz was saying, 200 million have to be found jobs. So it's a question of what, you could call benevolent capitalism, conscious capitalism, which is a term that many people use in the US. We need that kind of a model. But I don't see, if you have any worries about this will become a China and everybody will be told to do this at certain wage prescribed by the government, far from it. I don't think this government or any alternate government that could come in the next maybe 10 to 15 years is going to change that very substantially. We'll take one more question, then we'll finish, and then we'll take more questions.
We have to go beyond end of capitalism and so on and so forth. The key challenge will be, are we promoting youth enterprises in the next 20 years? That will define the success.
And you made a very important point. That's what creates the jobs. Yes.
My name is Subhash Bal. I am a CM, that is charter member in TiE Pune. So my question is related back to the manufacturing issue, and that particularly hardware related. Because we do software-wise, we're doing well. Now what do you do about hardware in manufacturing? So my question is, very briefly, how important do you believe is setting up semiconductor industry in India? Because that's one area which is kind of surprising. We do very, very well related to semiconductors, whether it is design and so on. or related things to it, but nothing about manufacturing. So how important do you think it is?
I'm not an expert in this, but from what I know, semiconductor is going to be critical in the future because the IT agenda of cloud computing and so on and so forth will depend on the global supply chains on the semiconductor industry. So it's critical.
So Subhash, there's a lot of research going on this, and in fact, if you look at the reason why they never set it up was the fab plants were way too expensive, and there were some initial investments done in Chennai, but I don't think they invested enough. So which is why you didn't see a Taiwan or even a Thailand, and of course a China emerging. Today, if you look at the semiconductor policy, which is very wise, it's fabulous semiconductors, and even on many of the loans that we sanction in the State Bank of India, like Tata Group, Tata Electronics is creating, the covers for, so there's a lot of collateral activity around electronics that's being created. Do I think Intel will ever set up a humongous facility in India? Not at this point of time. Okay, I don't think it's there. But India is rightly interested in labor-intensive activity, even in the electronic spaces. That's what you'll probably see. It may happen that somebody really comes in and sets up a huge semiconductor plant, but the kind of investments you're seeing from Apple or Intel, etc., are much more in the peripheral area and not in the core area. So I think that's really where we're going. Okay, let's move on. I'll come back to you later. Don't worry. I mean, we'll just take another 10 minutes and then we'll come back. So a couple of themes I want to touch upon, Ejaz, especially true for the tech sector. Just tell us a bit about the role of India's, the whole diaspora that you've seen so far. Indians living abroad, bringing ideas, bringing jobs to India, and is that on the wane? Do you think it's going to continue? How should young people in this room building companies look at people sitting in America, whether it's in Silicon Valley or wherever, and what should be our viewpoint towards that?
I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the role of diaspora networking, missing in this link here. Actually, we did a study on this. Odesk is the largest online business company in the world. And they approached us, and they shared the data, that majority of the outsourcing of Odesk in USA is going to India. And we asked the question, is this corruption or is this for productivity growth? And it was easy for us because by looking at the names, the Indian ethnic names, we could distinguish who is getting. And the end result was that there was no corruption. Actually, it was productivity enhancing. It lowered the cost of outsourcing to Odesk. But then we also asked the question, the digital platforms themselves are a source of networking. So what role does diaspora networking have to do? These are two different channels. And we found that over and above the digital networking, the diaspora networking also helped. So given that I see a very bright future for the global networking, I do think that the diaspora should be more mainstreamed in the Indian policy making. I'm not sure if they have much of a voice academically or policy-wise. I think it's critical that we need to integrate them and bring them into the policy discussion. Because India has a very big youth bulge and America is aging. So the diaspora networking is going to be critical. Same in Europe, it's an aging society. So building on the diaspora networking and getting them more engaged, that'll be fantastic. There's a very bright future in that.
So in a sense, that's really what TiE has done well, because even what we do, because I also run TiE Global's social enterprise special interest group. So we're finding the participation and the willingness of people to engage from Silicon Valley, from Washington DC, from so many places is amazing. So there is a lot of interest. At the same time, one of the reasons why Indian government has been wary of diaspora, to Ejaz's point, is that they don't want to be lectured, okay? They don't want somebody to tell them how they should run the country. So obviously the governments would want a certain channel in which diaspora participate. The diaspora is looking for a much wider canvas. So I think that's always a kind of a tension that exists between the two. Another question, Ejaz, you've been talking about urbanization. Okay, and in India, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I have a very good friend called Arun Maira, who was the former chairman of Boston Consulting Group in Asia Pac. So Arun's feeling is that unless you distribute jobs, really make the next 100 cities as vibrant in terms of physical, digital, social infrastructure as maybe the top 25 cities are, the country won't grow. At the same time, there is a case to say that, look, proper urbanization, getting Pune an airport to start off with, would be one solution. So which one do you lean on? Should more jobs go out of urban cities, or should there be a smarter model of urbanization?
I'm inclusive. This is market forces. Whoever says what, we will have less influence and the market forces will operate. So let me give you evidence. When we examined manufacturing sector over the last 20 years, we found that it is de-urbanizing. All the manufacturing enterprises are moving out from very costly mega cities, Delhi, Calcutta, into tier 2, tier 3 smaller cities where it's a much more cost competitive. So, but the pace of this de-urbanization of manufacturing sector has been weak because the infrastructure in tier 2, tier 3 cities is just not good enough. Sometimes they lack electricity, they have to put their own power plants. I mean, that's the history. But where do I see the future over the next 20 years? The future growth of India in the next 20 years will be in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, not in mega cities. I mean, it's happening already in the manufacturing sector. I'm still exploring what's happening in the modern IT services, but I suspect the modern IT services will follow the same path as the manufacturing sector and migrate to tier 2, tier 3 cities. This is not to say that the existing cities should not have good infrastructure, that Pune should not have internet. Yes, it will. But the big theme is that the growth trajectory in India is going to move from mega cities to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. I mean, we did another work, which I think Vijay Kilkar really liked. We examined, what makes cities competitive. And we use the same platform that this organization has. How many youth enterprises established in which cities, and what explains this? And we found that those cities which have a better physical and human infrastructure attracted many more new enterprises. So there's one message for the city mayors: just scale up your physical and human infrastructure and you'll do well.
No, that's absolutely true, and I'm sure some of you are aware of this. I remember when I moved to Pune in 2001, I was just telling Ejaz, there were hardly 5,000 people in IT in the city. I mean, between the three of us, Zensar, KPIT Cummins, and Persistent, and a few others like Vishwas Mahajan of TiE, there were very few companies. And today you're looking at probably 5 lakh or 500,000 and moving up. And I still remember at that time we had to lobby for everything, because I remember an American friend asking me that in Pune, which side of the road do you drive on? It's a very tough question to answer then. It's tough even now. And I used to tell him that, look, in America you drive on the right of the road, and in Europe you drive on the left of the road. In Pune we drive on whatever is left of the road. Okay, so which is not true today. So my friend Vikram Kumar, the commissioner, will kill me for jokes like this. But even then, I don't know how many of you know, when I moved to Kalyani Nagar in Pune East, Kalyani Nagar was 900 rupees per square foot to buy apartments or houses. Koregaon Park was 2,300 per square foot. Suddenly today, Trump Towers is selling at 20,000 per square foot in Kalyani Nagar. You know what happened? 2 bridges came up. You know who built the bridges? The builders built the bridges. The builders actually built the bridge. Because they realized that their property would shoot up. Today you look at a Kharadi or a Magarpata or a Manora, it's because of the builder. So I'm saying there's a lot of forced collaboration in this city for everybody spending money to make stuff happen, which will happen in IT as well. So last couple of questions, Ejaz, on the topics that we wanted to touch upon. One is women's participation. Okay, how do we get, like I'm on the board of this entity called Educate Girls, which works in the tribal areas of Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan. And in the COVID, while a lot of kids dropped out of school, some young girls have dropped out forever. So the problem of saying a girl can be used for other stuff than being educated is still very strong. So how do we ensure that over the next 25 years, women's participation really moves up? Is there any thoughts that you have or any examples from your World Bank work to suggest?
Yeah, we examined, the youth enterprises across industries in India. Manufacturing, road, sanitation, computer, IT services. And what is shocking is that women entrepreneurs in the IT industry is just 2%, one of the lowest in the world. Striking, I think, just thinking about it. Manufacturing is a little bit higher. So that just to give you a flavor, but the big issue is that majority of women are not employed in the labor force. And India can't achieve double-digit growth without 50% of the labor force being employed. I mean, they need the 50% of the labor force to produce the output to achieve double-digit growth. What can be done? Once again, for the youth enterprises and women enterprises, scale up investments in education and physical infrastructure. I mean, that's a universal message again and again for gender inclusiveness also. I mean, there is role for customs and traditions, etc., but they don't figure so prominently in a hard econometrics work with the Harvard Business School. The only two things matter. Just scale up the investments in education of women and give them better access to physical infrastructure, because the responsibility on women due to poor infrastructure is even more hard-hitting, because women shoulder the burden of household keeping and then poor infrastructure. So it's a double taxation on them. So a good physical infrastructure will lessen their burden of household work so they can contribute more to jobs.
Absolutely. So one last question, and then we'll throw it open for a couple more questions from the audience. On the whole green growth of India, I mean, we've been talking about it for a long time, and I remember 15 years back I was speaking in Tianjin near Beijing with the then Chief Minister of Delhi, Sheila Dikshit, and somebody asked her the question from the Asia Society saying that, look ma'am, you've become Chief Minister, what's your vision for the environment of Delhi? And she said very clearly that, look, my priority is the development of Delhi, the environment can take care of itself. But today, we can't say that anymore. So green economic growth is going to be very, very critical. So what do you suggest we do? We still have the dilemma of not enough people are at work, and at the same time there is a compulsion for green. So how do we do this?
All the confusion that we face and all the dilemmas we face is solved by the data provided by ASI and NSS surveys carried out by the government, which covers 650 districts in India and millions of enterprises. So we picked up the data. All enterprises have to use energy as an input. And we asked the question, how has energy efficiency evolved in India over the last 2 decades? If enterprises are more efficient in using energy, that is, they use less energy to produce a unit of output, that's good for the green growth. Two trends came out from this work. One, energy efficiency has improved in the megacities and urban areas, but it has actually worsened in tier 2 and tier 3 cities and rural areas. And it has worsened also because of de-urbanization of manufacturing. The manufacturing sector is moving out from mega cities to tier 2, tier 3 cities. But they don't have access to reliable access to electricity. So they are using their own power plants and generators. So we found that that's creating a lot of pollution and energy efficiency is trended down. And this problem is going to get worse over the next 2 decades as tier 2, tier 3 cities become the new drivers of growth. And if we want to achieve new green growth, we need to focus on the tier 2, tier 3 cities and scale up investments in good infrastructure.
The good news I have for all of you guys is that, look, every Tuesday we meet in State Bank to clear proposals, and at least there will be one alternative energy proposal, solar energy and quite a few others. So I think it's happening, but as I said earlier, to make it happen is going to take some doing. Yes, you had a question. Go ahead.
Hello, sir. I'm Krish Agarwala. I'm a student founder. So my basic domain is street food and how to lift up the people.
Which college are you in?
Ferguson. So my question was, we have schemes. So your special emphasis was on investing in human resources and capital expenditure. But infrastructure, yeah, sorry. So, but my main thing here is we have schemes for it. But how the policy is implemented is the question. For example, the National Skill Development Mission was scaled down from 100 million to 10 million in India. And recently, the basic question is, how do we look forward to the future of India? Because how should the policies should be implemented? The policies which we make should be implemented.
What kind? When you say policies, just give an example.
So if the government is making some policies, so how should we implement it? Because with the advent of state control of the government, we have, the 2 decades of growth has been we have been taking it for granted, the 2 decades of growth. And now when the growth rate is shrinking, we are focusing more on infrastructure investment. And
so to generalize the question, Ejaz, is it a policy creation problem or an implementation problem at the center and states?
No, I think this is a very good question, and I have a column in the Hindu where I argue that panchayats now have a role to play. The village panchayats have a role to play, but that's headline. I think the right thing is what Vijay Kelkar and I think, is it Abhay Finance Commission? They have a column, which calls for a very improved coordination between center, state, and the city local governments. I mean, I will not be able to answer this, but Vijay Kelkar shared that column in EPW with me, which is pretty good. It proposes, how to overcome the problem that you are. So implementation is a key, and there are solutions with improved coordination between center, state, and the local government.
Sir, can you just pass the mic there?
could I ask a follow-up question?
No, we're just running out of time.
Okay.
Somebody else has a question here? Yeah.
Somebody at the back too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay.
So I have a question that there are 2 types of reforms of your economics question. One is on the demand side and one is on the supply side. So in last 2 years, India was mostly focused on the supply side, and I'm not sure how it's working in the USA. But I just want to know your thoughts that which side we should focus on and what are the benefits of that reforms.
I think the question really, Ejaz, is that, today there is a demand problem in the economy, because there's not enough offtake, which is why industry has a lovely excuse to say we cannot invest because our capacity is utilized less than 60%. So is there any, again, global examples of boosting demand so that then supply can follow?
Yes, we have to take a dynamic approach. And we compared return to education investments in India with the return to investment in education in USA and Europe. And there is clear evidence that return on investment to education in India is much higher than in USA and Europe. How is that? because investment in education propels higher growth, and the higher growth propels higher return. So that equity investment in education is excellent. So from a dynamic approach, it will take off. Similarly, on physical infrastructure, roads, electricity, the return on investments are much higher from a long-term perspective because the growth will be higher and it will more than make up. USA and Europe will not get that high growth. It will not get that high rate of return on investments in education.
Ajay, just go ahead.
Okay, so my question is that we talk about the demographic dividend, right, of India. But there's also a accompanying challenge that, yeah, we do have people, we have the youth, but in the global markets, it's the opposite, right? There is a requirement for labor force. There's a requirement for the services businesses, industries, healthcare, right? But there is obviously a lack of mobility of labor, of the lack of mobility for the dividend that we have to really go out and export our talent globally. IT, it happens, obviously. But where else do you see it? I mean, nursing or the medical profession is still very, very small right now. Do you see globally the trends changing that will encourage labor mobility? And that would be a great way, I would feel, to be able to leverage our demographic dividend. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in fact, just to add to that, Ejaz, I remember talking to Tom Friedman 10 years back when he had written the book, The World is Flat. And today there's so many trade barriers and divisions and protectionism that has sprung up in the West, in China, etc. So do you think there is, as Ajay is saying, an opportunity for a continuing global mobility of labor?
Yes, there is. I'll not be able to cover everything, but go to Google and type in Ejaz Ghani Global Talent Race. India has won the global talent race. There's an aging population in USA and a youth bulge in India. And it is migrating. It's not easy, but India is way ahead. Half of the Nobel Prize winners or half of the professors in Ivy League are all Indians. The Google CEO is an Indian. Now, if we look at data from the Ministry of Finance, the remittances that India gets from migration is huge. Very stable source of remittances. So from a macro lens too, I mean, it's not easy to, this is not to say, but I see in the long run, India stands to gain from the global talent race.
So I was there in the Middle East recently, and half of the healthcare population or the healthcare workforce in nursing or otherwise is Indian, especially Canada.
And Goa. No, you're right. In fact, I still remember, Ajay, 15 years back when we made this analysis, we said that, look, Indian education output is so much that there'll be a talent pool excess of what was required, of almost 50 million people, and the global shortage of young people will be 47 million. So we said we will serve the entire world and keep 3 million on the bench. This is utopia. Okay, it's not going to happen. Any last question before we get out? Sorry, there's too many of you guys, I know. We'll give the chance to the lady at the back. And the rest of you try to catch Ejaz because I have to get him somewhere else at 8 o'clock.
Thank you. Actually, being myself Vasanti Mulaskar, I have a startup of software development and digital marketing here, and team of 30 people in my company. So when we talk about women empowerment, most of the ladies are working in their jobs or their service expertise. They are in a service, delivering the services. And on the other hand, we say services are not scalable. Then how you will put the light on to make the woman entrepreneurs business scalable?
She's saying that women are mainly employed in small services businesses. And if services, of course, that's an argument you're making that services business is not scalable. So you say, are women barking up the wrong tree?
There are two drivers of growth for any enterprise. Scalability and agglomeration economies and networking. These are different forces. So even if you are not benefiting so much from scalability, you're going to benefit a lot from networking and agglomeration economies. So just keep expanding.
And don't rule out women's participation in new manufacturing. Because today, if you look at pharma, you look at IT products, of course, you may not call that manufacturing. But even if you look at the new electronics, that things are coming up in Sri Perambadur and Sri City, etc., there are a lot of women being employed in manufacturing. So it's a question of wanting to do it, of course. You must have read the problem that Apple's outsourcing partner created. Because they created these hostels which had multiple women employed. The women complained. So it's not like women are not employed in manufacturing. So I think you should look at that. Rashmi, you're the boss, so tell me. You tell me whose question to take as the last question, then you can be blamed. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name is Samir. I run an IT services company. So I want to go back to the youth bulge we are talking about, and we like to call ourselves as the youngest country. But if you see, half of the population is women population in that. And technology sector is the largest sector where women are employed or have opportunities. But about it, technology sector has about 28% women working in it. So that's again a very small part. So when we call it a youth bulge, I have a feeling that it is not, because 50%, if 50% of it are women, then we need to do something radical to, increase their participation and maybe increase the growth rate. I don't know how.
Okay, I will let Ejaz answer it, but just to correct your data, at entry level, women coming into IT sector is 52% of the total entry. What happens is the drop-off, which is something that all of us are concerned about, because at the top level, it's less than 4%. Right. Middle management is what you said, 22%.
Yes.
So there is a drop-off caused A, by men and this whole male-dominated society.
Patriarchy.
B, women and their own perception of that they are responsible for the home, the children, the parents, the in-laws, and the man can go have a jolly good time. Okay, so I think both perceptions need to be changed. I mean, when I see my daughter growing up in New York with a British husband, it's complete equal sharing of responsibility. I mean, she would not have it any other way. My son-in-law would not have it any other way, but India has some way to go for that. So he's talking about the whole women entering the workforce.
I mean, these perceptions are fine, but I go by hard NSS and ASI survey data. And 50% of the women are not employed. What's the solution? The solution is women youth entrepreneurship. Women youth entrepreneurship is so low in India. I mean, youth entrepreneurship is low, but women youth entrepreneurship is even lower. I'm so glad that they had this 2022 competition. I mean, that's the way to go. Now, why is women youth entrepreneurship important? Because when women establish an enterprise, they hire many more women. So the solution to scaling up women's job is just promote more women entrepreneurship. They have very strong networking and they will hire more women.
No, it needs to be done consciously. Like in our investee companies, out of 11 investee companies, 9 the CEOs are women. And given a choice, we will always hire a woman. So exactly what Ejaz said, that more women will hire more women and it becomes a virtuous cycle.
Again, India is not new to this. I'll give you an example. India introduced political reservation for women in panchayats. This law was passed. And we asked the question that those panchayats where 30% of the seat was reserved for women, what was their performance compared to the other panchayats and other districts which did not adopt the 30% political reservation? We found that where political reservation for women was accepted, women took off. Many more enterprises. So there are various political instruments also to promote that, and India has successful stories behind this.
Okay, I'm going to stop this session. Sorry about that. I know it was excellent, and I mean, it's very rarely we meet a person of such wisdom and such data-based analysis in our industry as Ejaz Ghani. So Ejaz, thank you very much. I mean, it was a learning for me, and I'm sure all of us enjoyed the 1 hour interaction. Has somebody got to say a last word somewhere? Okay. Yeah, take this. Only 2 mics at a time.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting problems, or most of us when we are running a business, we are focused on our immediate problems. What is the customer need? Where do I get my next payment? How do I make my next payroll? A lot of time we forget that we operate in an environment which is impacted, right, with so many external factors. And today's session was a conversation about these external factors that have a bearing in terms of not the short term, but the long-term implications for our businesses. So as compared to a lot of the other sessions that we typically do, which are a little bit more short term, I think take it from this perspective that this is what the study of economics or the macro perspective is just so very important. As entrepreneurs, when we imbibe these conceptual frameworks, which are what is going to change, what is going to impact that change, what can drive the change, then we can participate and hasten the process ourselves in our own ways. And I'm sure Dr. Ghani today, with your inputs, which came again and again, right? Investment in infrastructure and investment in human capital, 2 critical things. The focus on youth entrepreneurship and women entrepreneurship, which you're so passionate about, I think it is showing us the way ahead. And along the way, we touched upon so many critical, important facets that maybe we have overlooked in our own understanding of the environment and the element within which we operate. So I think, thank you very much, Dr. Ghani. It was a wonderful experience. I'm a student of economics myself, right? So from my point of view, there were so many wonderful insights that you brought in. Your ability to approach with an impartial nature, because you're looking at data, you're not talking about only perceptions. You're using hard data that you're going back to, referring to, and then giving your answers is itself, like they say, that is the kind of an wisdom that you've really brought to us today. So thank you for gracing us on this occasion. We would have loved to have an overflowing hall, but all of you turned up. I'm sure you're going back with gems of wisdom, which you wouldn't have had the advantage of reading just books or some articles, because somebody articulating that so very clearly. And thank you, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, for wonderfully framing the questions, for wonderfully ensuring that you interpreted the questions from the audience and turned them into something really worthwhile for all of us. So on behalf of TiE Pune and all of us out here, we would like to thank both of you for your time and your presence. Let's have a round of applause for them. And we have, yeah. I agree. I completely agree. We have a small token of appreciation for Dr. Ghani on behalf of TiE Pune.